thanks for coming out. This is the 5th year that we've done these Land of Beginnings storytelling events. And it's just simply something that the county does to preserve the history and the heritage and the culture here. You know, it's for local people. It really is. The questions are asked, well, what do we need to do to get some tourists out here and vacationers and get them to have a little clue about things where they used to be here? Well, it's not for them, it's for us. And this will be a session here that I'm really looking forward to doing. We'll go ahead and get started. We've got Mr. Daniel here, and Ann and Carol. And Daniel, I want to start with you. And I talked to you a day or two ago. You told me that as a teenager you were in the CCC camps. Mm-hmm. Is that right? Yep. You had to be 18 to join up in the federal government. How old were you?
13.
13.
Mr. Ike Davis, I don't know how many of you know him.
I did.
But he told me I was big enough if I weren't old enough. So I went in at 13.
Well, it was a paying job. It didn't pay much, but it paid something.
$1 a day.
Yeah. Ike Davis, he was up in Manuel, Roanoke Island. He was he was the federal employee in charge of it out here, I guess.
Yeah, he was.
In Veterans Administration.
He was in the courthouse all the time, mostly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where did you do most of your work? Was some on the island here? Was some of it up there in Roanoke Island, or?
We left here and wound up in California, and then I was transferred back to North Carolina. I didn't find out until one time I was in Florida and I went to one of their meetings they have every year. And I found out from them that I was in the construction business. That's why they kept moving me around. And I went to several schools from them. I got a degree from electrical engineering and diesel engine.
Right.
They give me a good schooling.
Yeah.
I crossed the United States 8 times.
With the Civilian Conservation Corps.
Yep.
That's amazing.
I was in Buxton up here for a while. I was over in New Holland for a while. I was in Matteo for a while. I was in Matteo when Roosevelt was there.
1933, construction on Waterside Theater. 37.
I was an Indian.
You were an Indian? You were in the play?
I was an Indian. That's what he wanted a bunch of CC boys for. We had to get up there and act like we was jumping around, playing. Of course, I was a whole lot younger then I could be. Well,
how did you get around? I mean, you lived here in Hatteras. You pretty much grew up down in the same neighborhood you live in today, didn't you?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, would you just catch a ride with somebody, hop on a fender or something? How did you get to Buxton?
Walked.
Walked? Yeah. How did you get to Manuel?
Well, when we was just messing around, we walked. But at that time, we caught a mail boat.
Right.
They had a mail boat come down. They always had a little skiff, shove skiff, would go out and take the mail off of it and trade. And but they would haul passengers. There weren't a whole lot of passengers to haul, maybe 1 or 2 people. But that mail boat run every day.
Well, that's about a 57-mile walk. You actually have walked to Manuel before.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
More than once?
To what?
Numerous times, or?
Yeah, we used to go to the Wright Memorial when there's nothing but a big sand hill there, and they had the foundation for the memorial. We used to like to run and jump off the sand hill. When you jumped in the sand, it didn't hurt you a bit. Unless you hit it the wrong way and you rolled too much. We used to go up there and play, and just had a lot of fun. We'd sleep on the beach. They had a lot of Coast Guard stations all up and down the beach. You could stop in there and they'd give you bowl of beans and a cold biscuit.
And you be on your way to the next
Yeah,
station?
they enjoyed you stopping in.
What were your, was Toby Tillett the captain of the ferry
Yeah,
at that time?
yeah.
You remember the name of it? Was it Barcelona?
I don't remember what the name of it was. He'd pick you out. He didn't have no special landing. He just landed anywhere on the beach where it was the closest. And he supposed to have charged us 10 cents, but he never did do it.
Right.
He just let us go, get on and go.
Did you ever stop at the Pea Island Life Saving Station with any, Mr. Collins, any of those fellas?
We worked all of them down that road there, but there's something I can't get through my mind. I can't remember any blacks being there.
Right.
I have searched everywhere, but they keep saying they were. Maybe it's because I was sun blinded. I don't know what's wrong.
Well, what about, what happens if you got this, sometimes this was in the heat of the day, did you carry water with you? Did you get sunburnt or mosquitoes keep you running?
Believe it or not, you could dig a little hole on the beach and there was fresh water come up in it. And you could scoop it up and drink it.
Wow.
If you got hot, jump in the ocean. Swim a while.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of wild horses on the beach. And we'd catch them sometime, or we couldn't catch them in a while. And we'd run them out in the ocean and get on their backs. And you could stay on them until they hit dry ground when you were gone.
So that was more fun than it was really trying to get a ride.
They had one old bull. He stayed on the beach between here and Frisco, and that sucker loved to chase you. If you saw somebody else that come that way, you'd ask them, "Have you seen Albert today?" "Yeah, he's over back at the sand hills." Well, we'd walk over on the shore side. And if he was on the shore side, we'd walk the beach. Well, that sucker was after you.
So
I don't know whatever happened to him.
there was probably a lot of, I guess they called them scrub cattle, and what other animals were there? Goats?
Yeah, there were goats, there were everything that you could think of. My father used to stay with the horses more than anything else. He used to have a mess of horses. I still got a branding arm that he used to brand them with. And they had what they call a dipping bat. They had one right close in there. Right in there where the Balance Texaco station.
Okay, down Carroll Deering Ridge?
It was a little farther down, but they had a pretty well where that big housing project is going on in apartments.
Well, the livestock, they just kind of foraged around. We didn't have feed stores or anything. They were pretty much on their own. Anything green coming up, got nubbed right.
Anything green, they'd eat it.
Right.
They had about all animals out there. People knew whose was who. They didn't bother them nothing. And everybody got along good, not like it is now. You wanted to go down the beach, go swimming, you could, and there's a bird down there, you didn't bother him.
Right.
Now you can't even go to the beach. They got so many laws now, I don't know when the last time I was at the beach.
Did you, when you were a child, did you go down to Ocracoke much?
On the 4th of July. That's when Ocracoke had a big square dance. And everybody took off to Ocracoke. We went in my brother's boat one time, and we almost missed the dance. My brother, he was a mess anyway, tying, a lot of people knows him. If they don't, they should have. They're missing something.
I
But
remember.
you remember? Tell me if I'm fibbing.
No.
But you could control the engine, you turn the gas down on it, and he did that. And then we only had one pair of pliers on the boat, and he'd turn that gas down, and she'd idle right down. Then he'd throw the pliers overboard, and you couldn't, no way in the world you could turn it and speed it up. And we spent all day going Ocracoke. But he was that kind of fella. He just thought it was fun. Which would give us a chance to speed. There's about 10 or 12 of us on the boat. We did a lot of swimming, diving overboard on the way down. We had a big time.
I bet the water was a lot clearer back then and
Yeah.
could see the bottom. Yeah.
We had Ocracoke was, they've always had singers and musicians there, and we'd square dance, and don't know if that ain't the last time I ever square danced.
Well, where would you go? What was the name? Was it
They had
down British Cemetery Road, or
I don't even know nothing about Ocracoke.
it was probably something like the Beacon that they had
Yeah.
here, I guess.
Silver Lake.
Whole lot better.
Okay, Dixie says the Silver Lake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Had a beacon, you ought to be armed when you walk that place. And have a good helmet on.
I'm told that in the Beacon there that and the Beacon and the Bucket of Blood, and some of the Bucket of Blood was up in Buxton, but they had trash cans in the corner. But when you finished your beer bottle, you just kind of threw it over in the corner, and it smashed up, then fine. But you know, there are people in there barefooted walking on glass.
I always loved to fight. I don't know why. Nobody taught me. But I had a little piece of lead I molded, just fit in the bottom of my hand, just perfect. And that piece of lead weighed 1/4 pound. And you hit somebody with it, they know it. They had a boy in the Coast Guard station up in Buxton. He was doing something, I didn't like it, and I reached over my cousin's head and hit him. He told me when he come to, it's the hardest he ever been hit in his life. I didn't tell him what I hit him with. But we used to have a lot of fun like that.
Yeah. Well, Dan, I've never heard that aspect of you. I've known you for a few years, but I don't think I've ever heard that story.
That's the only pleasure you got down there. There wasn't nothing to do. And boy from Ocracoke, he was a Scarborough, I can't think of his first name. He come down from Avon to the Bucket of Blood. I mean, my wife's brother, we went out just for meanness and turned his Model A bottom up. Then he got ready to go home, and he found it out, and oil had all run out of it. And I went all the way down to my brother's boat and got some oil and gave it to him, put back in that car to get him home. And he didn't know who done it until his granddaughter was working on a house out here on the beach one time. And she was talking about it, and I said, would you tell him if I tell you that I turned that thing over, me and another boy, turned that Model A over? I don't know if she ever told him or not. He never did come look for me. But little things like that, we thought it was fun.
Well, Carol, I'm going to talk to you for a little bit. A man named Dennis Rogers with the News and Observer said that Taffy of Torpedo Junction, the book about World War II here, was one of the finest children's books ever written in North Carolina. And I think it surprises a lot of people to know that it was pretty much based on your experiences as a child. Could you tell us a little bit about that? You told me one time that Nell Wise Wechter said that one day I'm going to write a story about you. I'm going to write a book about you.
Nell Wise was my 7th grade teacher. She also boarded in my mother's house. Most of you aren't as old as I am, but if you remember, we were all as poor as church mice. We didn't have sense enough to know we were poor, but my mother was a type of woman who was a little ahead of her time for being a woman, and she'd do anything to make a dollar. So I never really knew what bed I was going to sleep in at night, and a lot of nights I slept out on the glider in the on the porch because I didn't want to sleep in the room with someone I didn't know. But anyway, she was my 7th grade teacher, and of course that was in 1941-42. Of course, you know the war started in 41, and we lost most of our ships in 42. And how many of you have read the book, Taffy? Well, it's a children's book, and Taffy is 13 years old. She has red gold hair. She has a horse and a dog, and she lives on the point of Cape Hatteras with her grandfather, and of course they were very poor. And he lived on stipend the government gave him each month, and they were very religious. Everybody went to church every Sunday. They read the Bible every day. They said prayer before, grace before you had meals, and I find that disturbing today. I go in people's homes and they start to eat, and I start to bow my head and they start to eat, and sometimes I say something if it's my family, otherwise I keep my mouth shut. But times have changed, and being an old woman like I am, I don't think for the better. But anyway, getting back to Nell Wise, she was born in Stumpy Point. Brilliant woman, and I've always said she was so brilliant, she was strange. The thing that I remember about her most was she taught me all the English grammar I think I ever learned. But she had this quirk about her for double negative. And if we ever said, well, what is a double negative? I try not to use them. I don't want no candy today. Anyway, she'd go ballistic, and he was telling me she whipped him one day. I never saw that side of her, but she was an excellent teacher. And in the 7th grade, children back then were kind of free-spirited. I mean, we ran all over the island. You remember there was no highway. We didn't have to have license for our cars. You didn't have a doctor. We had no running water. We had no lights. We lived pretty simply, and like I said, we were poor. Everybody was poor, so we didn't have sense enough to know. We had plenty to eat because we ate out of our gardens. But getting back to Taffy, but I have a habit of rambling. One day in the classroom, I was kicking up just like he says he kicked up in class. Not bad, but free-spirited is the word they always used with us. And she said, "I'm going to write a book about you one day, girl." And of course I laughed at the time. And she didn't write this book until much later. 57, I think, was the published year. And she sent me a first edition, and in it she said she had written a book about me. Unfortunately, in 1966, my house burned down and we lost everything we had, so I did lose that proof. But her daughter is still living, and of course she knew the book was written about me. And to correlate somewhat the book with my life, back then I had dark red hair. It's helped along today. And I had a dog and I had a horse, and during the war I would ride this horse all along the beach, just like Taffy did in the book when you read it. And there was an incident in the book where the torpedo hit a tanker and it blew and the windows rattled and broke, and that actually happened. I remember that only happened a few times, but it didn't happen just once. But the windows in the old schoolhouse in Buxton were low to the ground, almost to the ceiling, And when they moved like a quarter of an inch, and you'd think the whole window was coming out. And of course, she would say, "Run, run, kids," but she didn't have to tell us to run, because it was a matter of, you know, you did it or you were going to get bombarded with glass. And that's all in the book, too, about the children running to the beach and seeing the tankers burning. And of course, I think most of you here, if you were here during the war, you saw at least a couple of ships burning, because they'd burn at night, they'd torpedo them in the daytime, they'd torpedo them at night. And of course, we all knew the Germans were coming to shore, but we never felt afraid. And I remember everyone being told, don't write to anyone, your relatives or anyone away from the island, about the war. They did not want people to know that the war was here. And even today, when I speak in Chickamaucomico every Wednesday, people do not know that ships were torpedoed here. They do not know that World War II was at Cape Hatteras. And of course, we lost them all along the coast, but most of them were lost in the spring of '42 before the United States had time to get ships and airplanes and all, and you know, get the submarines. I will tell you an isolated incident about, we opened our motel in '55, and probably in 1956, '57, I had this man who wanted to come up and use my typewriter. We didn't have computers back then, or the technology that we have today. And he said, after he used the typewriter, he thanked me, and he said, "Ms. Dillon," he says, "you know, I was in the war." And I said, "Oh, you were? My husband was too. He was a Marine. And what service were you in?" And he said, "I was a German U-boat captain off of Cape Hatteras, sinking your ships." Well, I didn't know whether to hit him, throw him out of my, but I was nice. But I wish I remembered the man's name. I do not. But since I've been speaking, this has come back to me real strong, that here, the war ended in '45, say 6 or 7 years later. Here's this man sitting in my living room telling me that he bombed or torpedoed our ships. And of course, we know there's a lot of German subs off our coast sunk, and all of this is in the book of Taffy. And the biggest thing in the book, too, is Taffy caught a German spy. Well, of course, I didn't catch a German spy, but my mother did.
That's right.
She was postmaster of Buxton, and I remember being in the post office with her one day, and this German man, he was living with the mail hoses on the back road, which the back road is a significant part of the book. And this man came in, and the boxes were wooden, this light wood, and of course they were heavy, so I helped my mother take it off the counter and put it in the mail bags. And my mother asked him what it was, because it was so heavy. And he told her books. And after he left, I said to my mother, because I'm an avid reader, even today, I probably shouldn't say this, I don't even go to the bathroom without a book. But anyway, I said to her, "Mother, that man's lying to you, because you can't buy books here. Because if you could buy books, I would be buying everything in sight." And so she called the FBI. And the FBI came, opened the box, because she couldn't do that. And they were detailed maps of Maine, even over in East Lake. I remember that name specifically, her being told the depths of the water. And I think the Germans did this to see where the submarines could come into ports that were unguarded, like our Hatteras Inlet was. And they followed him to New York and caught a whole spy ring. His name was Hans Haas, I'll never forget it. And my mother got a commendation from the government for being responsible for catching this man. And that's all in the book, too. So it is a nice little book if you want to get it. They sell it at Dillon's Corner. They sell it up at Chickamaucomico, I think most of the
Gigi's got it,
stores,
Buxton Village Books.
Buxton, of course, Buxton.
Won a major award, I forget the name of it. It was a 1957 award winner from a group of female writers, but it was very significant, and there's been a number of newspapers report. Miss Carol's gone to Morehead City and talked to them, and also Raleigh, and these people want to come talk to her about that. We've all taken that for granted these many years. But Carol, I wanted to ask you about, on the front road there, now that we've got a paved road and everything, people ride on down, if they're southbound, and they get there where the Exxon and the bank is and the Orange Blossom Bakery, and you kind of make that corner and you come down there, come by Connors, and you end up there where your mother's house, where you grew up. And I don't think people realize that didn't exist 45 years ago. How did you if you wanted to go to the beach from your house, how did you get there?
Well, in Buxton, there were two accesses to the front. There was the front road then and the back road. At the Methodist Church, you could go through and go to the back road. And then what they call the crossroads today by Mr. Burrus Balance's old house. But otherwise, you went straight out, and there was a bridge over the ditch there by the Pheasant Center. And you went through the dump, because people were dumping things, and it was a pretty primitive ride, if you remember.
Cars cross it? You could take a Model A or Model T or some vehicle, Plymouth, crossed it?
Well, back then we didn't have a highway. We just had two ruts, and if you met a car, you had to get out of the way and back up until you could find a spot to turn around. We lived pretty primitively back then. I do want to mention my memories about the CCC, since you asked Mr. Willis about that. My father and Mr. Charlie Gray worked for the CCC camp when it first came here. And the man's name that ran the CCCs was E.J. Byram. I'll never forget him. He was a big man, very nice. But I remember when he came, if you remember, I really don't see many people here as old as I am, so you don't remember. Well, yeah, you probably are. I'm 81. How old are you? You tell you 80?
I'll be 80 this year.
Oh, well. Anyway, we had a very wide beach up until 1933. I would say 600-700 feet from the lighthouse. In 1933, we had a terrible storm, and that's my first memory of the lighthouse. I was sitting up on those steps that graduate up, and a wave came, hit the lighthouse, and almost washed me off of the step, and I can hear my mother screaming at me now. She never called me Tinker, which was my nickname, to get off of the steps. But getting away from the story, back to the CCCs, they were sent here by Franklin Roosevelt and to build the beach out. They moved the lighthouse from there back into a skeleton tower into Buxton because of the encroachment of the ocean. And he was sent here to build the beach out. And I can hear him telling my mother and father now how he planned to do this. He said one day he went out to the beach and he was just exhausted. He fell asleep, and the wind came up, and when he woke up, the sand had banked all along his body. And he said, if it can do that to my body, it can do that to brush. So he went into the woods, didn't ask people if he could do it. I don't guess people cared back then, really. But they cut yopons and trimmed them off and made stakes. They didn't buy any wood because there was no money in the Depression. And went out on the beach and built our beach back until we had 600 feet, until unfortunately the Park Service came and was going to be our savior. And of course they've raped our beach, and the beach is all gone. But they built 3 dunes with space in between. But that was somehow, I guess God helped him by letting the sand build up. But I remember a friend that I had in the CCC. I was just a kid, probably 10, 11 years old, but he scooped out a turtle, and I still have that today. And his name was Cecil Joyner, and they called him Slim. So we have lots of good memories from,
Well, that area around the lighthouse now, with all those pine trees around there, I mean, you know, if we brought Mr. Byram and Cecil Joyner, and they wouldn't recognize the place.
absolutely no trees. The cattle had eaten all the foliage. It was completely bare. I have pictures of that you see. There were no trees at all. When you went by the lighthouse, it was completely bare. Now, people used to build fences around their houses to keep the goats and the cattle out of their yards. And of course, when they built the stock law, you could go and get as many cows and horses and goats and whatever you wanted, as many as you wanted, but you had to pin them up. It was called the pinning stock law. That was in the 30s. I can remember that too.
Most places, fences are to
Talking
keep
too
your,
much.
you're doing fine, believe me. Fences are to keep pets and children in the yard, but on the Outer Banks, Hatteras and Ocracoke in particular, they're to keep things out of your yard. You don't want things eating your, the garden. I mean, that's your food source.
Everyone had a fence.
Your horse, what was the name of the horse that you had for years, when you were a teenager and rode on the beaches? What was the horse's name and who were some of your friends?
Well, actually, it was a Hatteras horse that came from Ocracoke, and Ivy Austin owned him. And I'm sure you remember Ivy Austin, those of you who live in Hatteras. The horse's name was Ivy. He was an Ocracoke pony, and I used to jump on, I did have a bridle, well, I had a saddle too, but I rarely ever used it. But I would put a bridle on him. I'd come home from school, jump on that horse's back, because he was a low-handed horse. He wasn't, but he could run. And we'd go out on that beach, and he'd get his hoofs just as full of tar from the ships that came in. And to get the tar off that horse's hoofs, boy, he didn't like that. But I had a dog, and it was a boxer dog, like in the book Taffy. And the dog would follow me along. But I remember going over that bridge, going past Mr. Nacy's house when you went straight out, and clack, 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 clack over the bridge, what used to be the radio station. It's the Veterans Center now, and all those buildings are gone. But during the war, we had a lot of, in fact, Wallace Gray was one of the radio operators. There was a little house, it was very tiny.
I've got a picture of that, and we'll break out some pictures here in a little bit. But it's actually, there was a picture taken in 1942, March of 1942, and you could get in trouble for that because the Coast Guard was here, the Navy was on its way. This was very serious stuff. And a 14-year-old girl, Buxton girl, Annie Hodges, got a Brownie camera for her birthday, walked up to this military installation, took a picture, and that is the representative picture we have going back to when Reginald Fessenden, the inventor, the forerunner of radio, working for Fessenden was a man named Lee DeForest, who went on to invent the picture tube, the forerunner of television here on the island. Thomas Edison actually visited this place. He was an elderly gentleman. So when you go from Fessenden, Marconi, DeForest, Thomas Edison, and then you add Orville and Wilbur Wright, 6 of the greatest inventive minds of the 20th century were right here on the Outer Banks within a 3-year period. And, you know, they came out here because of the strategic importance of being this far out here. But Carol, I wanted to just real quickly before I got it up, I know that Lindy Miller, and he was a cousin, and Jack Gray, but who were some of your, what did you do? Did you go to the beach? Is that what you, that was about the only thing to do really, wasn't it?
Well, what we did for amusement, I had my grandson open up his museum in Buxton. You really ought to all go see that. It's such a work of art and a lot of information. But I used to play with Lindy Jack and James Rawlinson, and the only girl I ever played with was Dolores Jennette, and I have a story I'd love to tell you about her, but she'd kill me. But you had to be a tomboy to exist around those boys, and we used to go back of Mr. Rocky Rawlinson's house and play, and there were thousands of Indian artifacts. We used to collect the arrowheads by the bucketfuls and war with them. We built
Pottery
forts
pieces.
yeah, and didn't have sense enough to know how valuable they were. I was with Lindy when he found the sword that unfortunately the state took away from him and has lost it. They don't know where it is, and I blame my mother for that because she should have never called the state and told them. But I have a tendency to make friends with men today even because of my childhood relationship with those three boys. And I loved them just like brothers. Lindy's passed away and James has passed away, and of course Jack Gray is still alive. But we used to play ball with a stick and a rubber ball. They called it cat ball. In order to get anybody out, you hit them with the ball. And that was, we'd play ball like that. We'd go swimming in the Sound. We'd make forts, like I said, in war with the, and we always went to swim at the lighthouse. And I will tell you a story about Lindy and I. One moonlit night in 1942, they had a foot patrol during the war. You weren't allowed on the beach. And of course, we decided we wanted to go swimming this night at the lighthouse. And we were just about to jump in the water, and I can shut my eyes and I could see that man with that gun, and he was pointing it out, halt, halt, who goes there? Well, my Lindy, he runs like a jackrabbit, and I'm screaming at him, stop, you fool, they're going to shoot you. But we never went back. That was our last moonlit swim at night during the war. But it was a safe time back then. You didn't lock your doors. You didn't take the keys out of your car. The only thievery I remember is the boys stealing watermelons, maybe chicken now and then, but it was, I had a wonderful childhood. I came from wonderful parents. I had to go to church on Sunday or I didn't get out of the yard for a week. Unfortunately, my family is not like that today. I go to church alone. But it's a wonderful island. I want us to fight to keep it ours. I worry about what's going to happen to our island. I worry about what's going to happen to our country. But we're good people.
Amen.
We islanders.
Well, Ann, when people think about some of the older families here, I want to say a little bit about Ann. Ever since I was in school, some of the genealogy and the history we have here has been thanks to people like Ann, Beatty MacArthur, Carol and her sister Orman, and others. The history here is compelling, to say the least. People really do feel that we're on a sandbar out in the middle of nowhere, and but it's the opposite. It's the land of beginnings. There's so much stuff that is going on here. Carol actually gave me a picture. Ann gave me a picture. I'm going to have to go get it. I left it in the car. But this is the point I want to make about the history that is here. There was you know what happened at Iwo Jima, the iconic picture of the 5 Marines sticking that flag into the ground. Well, that was a staged picture by a cameraman. There was actually an instance before that when the Marines got on top of Mount Suribachi, and it turns out that in that initial group of about 25 Marines that was part of the first people to gain the top of that and plant the American flag on the island of Iwo Jima, which was a monumental event. There was a man from Frisco in that group, a guy named Lars Tolson. And I will get the picture. Now, everybody in this picture is identified. The picture is such that you can't really say, and look, all right, that's Lars. But this, unfortunately, he died in a motorcycle accident after the war. Had some, like a lot of people, had to deal with what he'd seen there. But the identification of all these people on this little snapshot, they're all armed. Every one of these people have guns and stuff. But that is just amazing. We're going to talk to Mr. Daniel here about, there's several people that have had quite a contribution in the war here, and the impact of World War II here was great. I wish Mr. Munn had been out here, or Mr. Balance, and some of the fellows from Avon and stuff, but they had the Outer Banks, just like the entire country had made a huge contribution to our World War II effort. Now, Ann, I've talked to you about some of the older families we've had. We've got Jennette's, we've got Pharaohs, we've got Midgets. Those are probably three of the most prominent names. But what can you tell me about any of those three families? What about the Jennettes? Do we know where they came from?
Hyde County, I think, is where they first come in.
Yep.
Mr. Nace told me there was 13 brothers come over. That's as much as I remember about them. But the first land records I found on them was 1770. And I found the deed in Currituck County where the Jennettes deeded the land for the lighthouse. That was, I have it with me. Can't remember all these dates.
And you people here,
Can you hear me? I'm looking down.
Was that 1790? Was it?
1770. A Rebecca Jennette deeded to a Jesse and Joseph, both sides of Buxton. And Jabez Jennette had a land grant. So they were here in the beginning.
Right. I've seen, there's a roster of, we were part of Currituck County from 1705 to 1820, and there was a militia out here during the American Revolution, and it's amazing. Carroll's, all three of these people, these islanders' ancestors were part of it. We've got Millers, Willis's, Jennette's and Burrus's and Scarborough's in there. But can you tell us a little bit more about the land that was deeded to the lighthouse, where the lighthouse used to sit?
It's Book 8, page 257, it's recorded in Currituck, and it's signed by those 4 Jennette children and their mother, Christian Jennette. She was their guardian.
Who was her husband? Which?
Her husband's name was William.
William Jennette.
And they had a son, another son named William, and then I'm sure you all remember Joseph C. Jennette. He was a lighthouse keeper. I'm hoarse from all this pollen.
Okay, there was a book written here called The Long Roll. It was the experiences of a fellow in the 20th Indiana, a man named Charles Johnson, and he talks about Squire Jennette. That probably had to be the Joseph C. Jennette.
That's right.
Because he owned the windmill, he had a lot of business interests, he was a government official, a notary.
He owned land in Hyde County. They grew their grain over there and brought it over here and ground it in the windmills.
Right. We were part of Currituck until 1820, and then from 1820 to 1870, when Dare County was formed in 1870. But that 50-year stretch from 1820 to 1870, we were part of Hyde County. A lot of people wonder why we have such a close connection with Hyde County. It was because it was the county seat. If you had to do any kind of deed recordation, or if you had any kind of business to take care of, you sailed across the Sound. In some places, you had to walk across the Sound, especially on the reef. Sometimes you actually had to pull your boat across the reef. What about
16-something, we were in Currituck from 1632 to 1820. Then we were, from 1820 to 1870, they were in Hyde, and then 1870, Dare County became a county. So you have to go, and we also have records in Tyrrell County.
What about some other families? You had talked to me about the Burrus. You actually have great records on the Burruses. I don't mean to hop from the Jennettes from the Burruses, but what can you tell us about the Burrus family that is on the Outer Banks today? Specifically, they're here on Hatteras Island, but I mean, they're all over the Outer Banks now. Where did they come from?
John Burrus come over in 1608. He landed in Jamestown with his wife, Bridget Buck. They were known as the true heroes of Jamestown. In 1993, I gave the talk at the Virginia Beach Historical Society on the Burruses. They were thrilled to death. The Burruses are in Virginia history. And not only that, we've been first in a lot of things. But the Burruses had the first child born in Virginia in the New World. So,
Do we know what her name was? It Ann? No, it
in
was
Virginia,
Virginia Burrus. Okay.
the first trials by jury were done in Jamestown. The first birth of an English child in Virginia was a Burrus child. First legislative assembly in America, and under first woman, Ann Burrus, daughter of John and Bridget, was the first marriage, 1609, to a John Layton. She was 14 and he was 27. A year later, the first child was born in the First English Protestant Church. Also, there was an Anthony Burrus there, and he was the pastor of that church. Let me first say, I am very proud of my heritage.
Well, that's quite a pedigree you got between the Burruses and the Jennettes there. And
Here's those daughters. They're Virginia, Alice, Catherine, and Margaret, and they all survived. John Burrus come over on the Mary Margaret. He come from England, and ever since then, there's been a Mary and Margaret in the Burrus family. Uncle Orlando had twin daughters. He named them Mary and Margaret.
whatever happened to John Burrus?
He was stabbed to death on New Year's Day, 1628. They had an Indian uprising or something or other up there. Let me see what else I've got here. Anthony, the minister, lived to be 90 years old. In 1716, I found a land grant for 160 acres of land at Cape Hatteras for a George Burrus, another 1713 for all the land between Chickamaucomico and Kennequite. All of this is in Virginia history. In 1993, Virginia Beach Historical Society asked me to give a talk on the Burrus family. They presented me with a book. George Washington walked here. He was very active in Virginia. But I bought one of the 160-acre land grant with me.
What is the Burrus that ended up on the Outer Banks? One time.
George Burrus.
So that's where our Burrus has come through.
That's what this grant says. It's George Burrus.
Is there a date on it?
1716. So we've been here a long time, and I hope we stay here longer.
You had to live and work the land for 7 years before they would give it to you. They wanted to keep you honest. If they just gave you a land grant when you got here, then where's your incentive? You had to live and work the land and pay taxes, and after 7 years, a minimum of 7 years, that's when you got your land grant. So feasibly,
No, if they
it could have been
could,
1709.
excuse me, Danny, if they could afford to pay their passage, they were granted 50 acres of land, and 50 acres for every male member in the household. Hezekiah Farah had 640 acres of land. He was out there where your motels and everything was. He had a land grant for that.
What do you know about the Pharaohs? They've been here. We've got some Pharaohs in
They
here.
were here. They were shipbuilders, the Pharaohs were.
Well, you have told me in the past that it makes a nice story that some of our ancestry here are shipwreck survivors, and that's true in some cases. But a lot of the families that are here today actually came over here to get away from some Indian uprisings on Carolina mainland.
Probably so. Some of them left. They were fleeing England. They wanted to be able to do things like, these were Protestants, the church, and all that stuff when they left to come over here.
Right. I know that a lot of attorneys and other government officials have called on you because of your research skills. you were talking to me about a fella, Bannister Midget, and just some of the neat people that were in the Midget family. Bannister, I think, was buried. He was one of the early bands. It was not Captain Band that we know from Life Saving Service. This was his great-grand, this was way back.
Well, this one is buried in Mount Pleasant, and the reason I was interested in it, he wasn't buried. He was interned standing straight up. This is the way he wanted to die. But listen to his epitaph.
Okay, say clearly.
This is about Bannister Midget. Kind reader, stop and silent be, for thou must die as well as me. Dissolved in dark and silent dust, prepare for death, for die thou must. Life is uncertain, death is sure. Sin gave the wound, Christ is the cure. His wish was that he could be buried standing straight up, so he would be ready to meet his Savior when he comes back again. But he has the first American midget is a black. He's American Midget was the son of Charles Midget and Elizabeth, and the grandson goes on and on and on. But anyway, he and Hannah became the parents. It goes on and on about the family. But he is the first black midget. His name is American Midget. And he is also buried over in Hyde County.
Okay, well, Daniel, we're going to come back to you. I know that, who were some of the fellas that you looked up to here when you were growing up? We know a little bit about some of who your friends were and everything, but, did you have any uncles that you were particularly proud of? You had a grandfather, Josephus, or was your father Josephus or your grandfather?
No, I had a brother, Josephus. My grandfather, I didn't know him. He died back in the 1800s. But he caught the biggest whale that had been caught over in Portsmouth Island. And they named it the Mayflower. So the Mayflower was the biggest ship it was in this country at that time. So they named that whale Mayflower.
There was big money in whaling back then with the whale oil, and
Yeah.
they used all of it.
Yeah.
I was told that the original foul weather gear, what they called oilskins, was actually whale and porpoise and dolphin hides that were dried out. They had just fantastic water repellent properties. Today we kind of find that horrific, but these things were here by the thousands, and you had to take advantage of the resources that you had. We didn't have the environmental awareness that we've got today. But who were some of the old timers when you were a kid that you looked up to? Did you know what any of the Peels there? Austin's?
Yeah. They've been dead so long I forgot their names. There's a lot of Austins and Peels, Willises, Midgets.
What can you tell me about some of the boats that came in? Or was the Hatteras, was that during your time, Fraser Peel, or?
Yeah, the old Hatteras. I've got a little model of her, but she used to run from here to Englehart, and she carried mostly people. You could put a car on her crossways. Then people that was going over the mainland would take her car with them if they wanted it.
Well, that had to be kind of a risky proposition, the way these boats.
And she also, in Elizabeth City, they'd bring groceries back. And to start with, they used to have their fish houses out in the water. And of course, the harbor, there were no harbor there then, just mostly small boats. And you could wade across it.
Wow.
And but they had their fish houses out there, and they Fish mostly out of rowboats. They call set net. They build, usually out of little sailboats, they fish the nets. And then it got to be where there were several boats. It had one named Kathleen.
That was a Styron captain. That was in the Styron family, wasn't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Andrew had one named Sterling.
Yeah,
Right.
I had the Sterling.
Daddy run the Virginia Belle.
The Mallinson.
Yeah.
But one thing they used to, if somebody really got sick, Coast Guard had us what they call a seaplane. Would come in land and they'd take the person on out and put it aboard that thing and take off. That's how they haul the real sick people to the hospitals.
Wow, yeah, if the weather was bad, then I'm sure a lot of people had to suffer through it.
Yeah. Most people grew up here as doctors anyway. They just don't have the paperwork.
What can you tell me about the airstrip over here where the development is? With Billy Mitchell, I guess, was a little before your time, but that was, where they used to have the car races, that was a lot of beach
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
My wife knew a lot about Billy Mitchell. He used to go to their house. Mr. Fred Stowe was an excellent fisherman, and he studied the weather. He studied the moon and everything. And Billy Mitchell come to him to find out, about the weather. He took him up in a plane. And that's when they dropped them flour bags on the ship for practicing. But I never did see him. My wife did.
Well, did you know the government pilot, Dave Driscoll? Did you?
Oh, yeah.
Did he ever take you up?
Yeah, I've been flying with him.
Yeah, he took a lot of children up. Carol, did he take you up too?
Yeah, he brought me, when my grandmother died, he brought me down and landed on the beach between Avon and Buxton.
Carol, tell me a little bit. Your mother was she was quite a woman. I know a lot of you in here know Maud White, but I remember her when I was a kid, and you could go to anybody's house and they would feed you. You don't have that anymore. But talk to me a little bit about her. Maybe your grandmother was. I've got a picture of her, and hopefully you can identify and say that yes, it was her. But and your grandfather, C.C. Miller. Any remembrances of your mother and your grandparents?
Well, my people were shipwrecked here in the 1620s. They married an Indian, so my first grandmother was a Croatan Indian. And my mother was a throwback to that look. She was my grandfather's 13th child. He was born in Kennekeet, and all right, you Kennekeeters, I said the best thing you ever do is get out of Kennekeet. I usually say things that gets me in trouble. But we have a graveyard in Kennekeet that's next to Kenneth Dickerson's house that I just discovered when the little Mexican boy got killed this year because he had nowhere to bury him. And I've never seen anything grown up like that graveyard. But anyway, we have people buried there. My great-grandfather and my great-great-grandfather and mother are buried there. And my grandfather had 2 wives, of course, but my mother was his 13th child. And she came here with my father to take care of him when he got sick in his old age. And he was the, he notarized, what do you call him, notarized?
Justice of the Peace, Notary Public.
Well,
Yeah.
I have his old stamper that was his, and he was a lighthouse keeper. He had a store. He was a merchant. He had sailing vessels that he rented out to people to fish on. He married my grandmother, who was from Bath, who, her great-great-great aunt was Blackbeard's last wife. We didn't used to tell that, but her name was Mary Orman. My grandmother's name was Mary Orman. Of course, my sister's name is Mary Orman, and she has a child, Mary Orman. So the name is carrying on through. My mother was a person ahead of her time, I think, for being a woman. She didn't believe that women shouldn't vote. She was born in 1900. Of course, women couldn't vote then. She was a very active Democrat, which I won't get into that, but
Well, here, I'm gonna
change.
let me show you a picture here. I'm told that this is Mary Orman Tyre Miller, and I don't know.
Well, she did teach school here.
That was this was down by where the school is today.
I can't really tell if that's her, to be honest with you. I
Well, I
do
was
have
just
pictures
told.
of her at that age, and it's certainly similar to her.
Okay. And then this is the school that you were talking about where,
These are the windows that, when the Germans sank the ships, they would almost come out. They were big windows, and the seats were, that was the 7th grade. This is the 8th grade that I was in when the war came, and this was the 11th, we only had 11 grades back then, so this was the 10th and 11th grade.
where was that school?
Over where the Anglers Club is. Actually, not where the club is, that's where we used to play catball. But it's where the state has the fence. The school was inside the fence.
Right.
And I do have a picture of that. And this is in front of my house right here. This picture here.
Okay, all right.
This was the house that we tore down, the John Annie house, which is there today, is right beside it. But yeah, that's the old mulberry tree. I've eaten a many a mulberry off that tree. And all of this was grown up. This is how I used to go to school. I'd go down this road, no shoes, and cut across the crossway right there, and cut through Lindy Miller's house and up through bushes and trees and briars. And if I wanted to get there quick, I would cut across here and go across the knolls where you got your feet wet if you weren't careful.
Well, the neat thing about those pictures is there's probably a lot more vegetation in the village of Buxton, not on the beach, of course, because it was bare beach. But, I mean, these were little sandy roads. And
Well, all these trees are gone, and all these bushes are
Orman, I
gone.
can tell you who that is.
Say again?
Orman.
Yeah.
I remember that old bush real well.
Well, I've heard a bunch of different descriptions, but it's always been, I think. I haven't heard anybody yet who says it is. So thank you for, now I know that that's the intersection of Rocky Rawlinson Road and,
Rocky Rawlinson Road's right here. My mother's house, the old house that's still there, is, well, there's a house in between this one and my mother's old house. And that house has been torn down. But there was an old pear tree there that we used to steal pears from.
well, and I
That's
wanted,
Delphine Miller, who that is. Did she teach school?
Who?
Delphine Miller that married John Jennette? Did she teach
Not
school?
in my lifetime.
Well, this was before. Orman will know who it is.
okay, well, you know, I remember in the yard, in the house that you grew up in, your I mean, that's gone through, there's 5 generations of Millers that have lived in that house. But there were, you know, what we would call exotic fruit trees in there. There was not just a pear tree, was there a banana tree at one time in there? Or?
No, a grapefruit. We
Okay.
used to have, our kitchen was away from our main house, which a lot of the older homes had because of fire. And I guess they used to throw garbage right out the back door. And from a grapefruit seed, that tree grew, and she used to cut it down. Well, finally, she just let it go, and all of a sudden, one year, here came grapefruit. Of course, she didn't cut it down after that, but I remember that very well. My mother came here to look after her father, and her father had a relative who had rheumatic fever when he was 5, so he was a little mentally slow. And he also had a brother. He went to my mother went to Elizabeth City one time, and my grandfather's brother was on the back porch, and she went and said, "Uncle Harris, come on into the front yard and sit with us, or the front room." And he said, "No, Frazier's wife won't let me go in the house." He was on the back porch. She said, "You go get your suitcase and you pack it, and you come home with me." And he lived there until he died, and he's buried in our graveyard. But I remember him, and I was only, I think, 4 years old when he died, so my memory of him is though he never came out of that back house. He and the other relative that was mentally, he wasn't born that way, but he was, anyway, they both lived in the same house. But I remember this old man never came out of the building. I guess he was just so old he never did. Now, I was a baby when my grandfather died, so I don't remember him at all. But my grandmother raised me, and she was a very religious woman, and I had read the Bible before I was 8 years old. And it was not a matter of if I wanted to read the Bible, it was just expected. And it was expected that I go to church, and it was just expected. You didn't, and I don't remember ever being saved. I was born that way. I mean, our people were religious, and when I see people that don't believe in Jesus today, I don't understand how they could get that way, because I always, it's hard to explain. I came from a good stock. That's all I can say.
Yeah, they say that faith is believing, but not knowing why. That's
Well, I'm not any preacher, but he's my best friend.
There you go. Well, we've gone through an hour and 15 minutes already. I'd like to field a little bit of questions, but first I wanted to say something here about Mr. Daniel. When I was at your house, I saw just commendation after commendation in World War II. You had 2 Purple Hearts, is that correct? How many Bronze Stars?
5.
5 Bronze Stars. How many Silver Stars? 1. That's amazing.
Supposed to have 2, but they didn't have no records on us.
Well, you told me one time they wanted you to drive to Charlotte to get it or something, and it's too far.
Yeah. That's a 3-day trip, best you can do.
Well,
I did go to Moorhead, get one. They had it at a veterans parade. Marlene drove me there.
Well, did Mildred go with you to France? You were part of the Normandy invasion, is that
Yeah.
correct? Okay, and the Battle of the Bulge?
Yeah.
What was it like to be able to go back? Mildred went with you. Who all went to France?
Marlene went with me. I think she's the one that really got it going. I mentioned it, I saw an advertisement, and she liked it, and I liked it.
Marlene wanted to go to Paris.
And then I had she put half of it back. I'd afraid to crawl on that plane she had to make that suitcase.
I saw a picture of it. That's the biggest plane you've ever ridden in, I'm sure.
That's a walloper. Got a big plane. All I got to see them sharks underneath of me snapping their teeth together.
So you got all the names written in there.
Well, you were, why the Army? I would have figured somebody with your nautical background, it would have been the Navy. Were you drafted, or?
They tried to get me to go to the Navy, they wanted me to go to the Coast Guard, they wanted me to go to the Merchant Marines.
Give you a copy, get you a copy of
I
that.
said, no, I'm going in the Army. They said, well, didn't you use to drive bulldozers? I said, yes, sir. They said, well, you're going into tanks. And on a Saturday, while most people were playing some kind of game, ball games, you had to do it. I'd go play with the tank. And I just loved to drive them after I found out they wouldn't hurt you, not too bad.
Well, that was your Hatteras roots showing up right there.
Yeah. And I had a good name from some of the boys that rode with me that I was the best driver they had. But I lost 7, so that's not very good.
Well, tell me about General Patton. I know that you had a chance, you were in his company there, had a chance, you were there essentially with him. I'm not saying that you were friends, but you took some orders, your division or your...
Yeah, he special trained us. We were just one battalion. We weren't no army, we weren't no division or nothing. He special trained us, like handpicked us almost. And most of the boys was from western North Carolina. There's 800 and some of us.
Wow, that's amazing.
And over 200 of them, all but 200 of them was killed right there in the starting with. And we left England, it was rough. And we got out in the middle of the channel and had to turn around and go back because we couldn't get ashore anyway. They had so many blockades on the beach. So about a week later, he went in Normandy beachhead, Utah Beach. And we got through there. And it's like this picture right there. The first thing he done, captured 11 division, Army divisions. He believed in going. He didn't want to stop until they took gasoline away from us. That's the only way he slowed us down. We fought 299 days nonstop.
That's amazing. That's amazing. When I said with Mr. Daniel and Mr. Munns and stuff, the war contributions that were made here, we have a gentleman in Avon who was actually at Pearl Harbor. There was a handful of Hatteras Islanders there, but there was one that was actually unconscious. He was a miller, and they had put him in a body bag. He had suffered such a concussion, and it's comical now, but it certainly wasn't then. But I was told that while he was in the body bag there, he got to kicking, and he heard in the bag, he could hear some people yelling and running away from him, and he had to get himself out of the body bag. And just some amazing stories. There's so many people. I mean, we should have Dixie up here. There's so many people around here. We could do these things probably every day. Ken and Edith, and just getting the stories. Folks, we're going to be running out of tape, and I promised we would, at least try and get some questions. Does anybody have a question about what it was like growing up here? Yes, ma'am. I need you to be loud.
I'm curious about the weather when you were a child. Did you have harsh winters and?
It was very, to me, when I was a child, I never had a heavy coat. We had to wear long drawers, which we kids all hated, and sweaters, but we didn't have heavy coats. But the foliage then was very thick. You didn't get the northeast winds because there were so many trees. And when I say trees, it was all around the homes, coming from the ocean side and the northwest side. And so it was a lot warmer temperature-wise too. And I don't remember seeing snow until I was a teenager here.
What's some storms that stick out? You've battled through all storms. I had a man tell me one time that there on the Mississippi River, people are still trying to recover after 13 years, but Mrs. Dillon brings her motel up every couple of years. And is there a storm that sticks out in your mind?
Well, I remember the 33 storm very well because it was a very bad storm. I was 5 years old. And 36, we had another very bad one. Of course, you all remember the 44 storm. It obliterated Avon. And those are the three that stick in my mind as a child or a young person. We had a huge oak that you couldn't put your arms around in our front yard. It went down in 33.
My father was out on the reef
Ooh.
at that time when it hit. The house he was in out there blew to pieces, and he dug a hole and had some grass roots he held on to. But when they got out to him to see if he was still there, he done lost his shirt. He blew the shirt right on his back.
The 33 storm. Wow.
They almost sure he was gone.
That's the storm that took 600 feet of beach,
Yeah.
at least 600. It could have been more, but it was a wide, wide beach before the 33 storm. And that's when the government came to build our beach back. Unfortunately, they don't do that today.
That's, she mentioned one of her boyhood friends, James E. Rollinson, and this was during Hurricane Emily, which was going really slow, and we had 11-foot storm surge. But one of the storm chasers that you see on TV was down here, and a local fella, Al, his last name escapes me, but anyway, well, no, it wasn't that Al, but anyway, they yelled to this storm chaser who was about to lose his vehicle. I mean, the guy he came to an island in a hurricane trying to do footage, and he bit off more than he could chew. But anyway, Jamesy, I'm told, yelled to him, "What's the matter, fella? Ain't nothing but a shirt tail breeze." And evidently the wind gets up there, and if you got your shirt tail out, it'll fluff that shirt out. And Emily was a monster.
Yes, it was.
Any more questions? Yes, sir.
I've heard so much about this bucket of blood over the years from my father-in-law. Is there any known picture of this place in existence? I mean, does anybody have an actual picture?
I had one, my father built that, by the way.
Oh, is that right?
Where was it, Carol?
It was just about where Hodges Motel is. Well, it's a Buxton Beach Motel now. It was right there. It was near the CCC camp, near the Coast Guard station.
What was some of the clientele there?
That was one.
We know Daniel was there,
That was one
but
rough place. I remember going there with my father. When my mother found it out, she like killed him. I was quite young, maybe 6, 7, but Boyd Gray was the bartender. I remember that quite well.
Bucket of blood was worse than the beacon.
Well, it was bloody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard people say, they got hit in the head and knives were used.
Well, Burrus shot a man that one time.
No, it's in the Beacon.
Huh?
It's in the Beacon.
Beacon.
yeah, I was told.
Never did do that
It
with
was a Kenny Heater.
him. Get him in the middle of it.
I was told that let's see, it's Edgar Gaskin said he got in a fight with one of those CCC boys, and the fella. Edgar was a character. I wish he was still alive. We'd had him up here. But he said the man hit Edgar so hard, he fell down the same time every day for 2 weeks. And those are the kind of stories that would come out of the bucket of blood. But and I've had a chance to talk to some people, and it sounds funny, but really, I mean, everything, they didn't have paper, they didn't have plastic, everything was in bottles. And there was glass all over the floor. It was really a Wild West. These men, these CCC guys, this was a rough bunch. This was not for the faint of heart. These guys were, a lot of them had, records and stuff, and these were desperate times. And, Daniel handled one or two of them. I mean,
My cousin, one time I was eating supper, he come running in and said, "Come on, Daniel, come on, we can get the fight out. Beacon, let's go." I left him supper and run out there.
My father bought that land from where the Cape Hatteras Motel is, almost to where the lighthouse used to be. He got a World War I bonus, $1,500. And he bought it from Mr. Burden Smith's, Miss Charlotte. Well, you don't remember her. It's way before your time.
no, that's out there by where Gigi's store is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's where she lived.
right.
Yeah. But that's how we all got our start, because like I told you, we were poor as church mice. We didn't have anything when we were,
That's one of the neat things about some of the island names. When you look at them, you say, Charlotte. Okay, that's got to be Charlotte. No, it was Charlotte. All right. And then Bethany. No, it was Bethany. So Axa. No, it was Axie. And everybody had just a way of pronouncing pet names for everybody. Any more questions? We got 5 minutes to tape.
I like to tell you what people used to ask me. Said, where in the world did you get your dialect from? Where'd you learn to talk that way? I said, we're the one that started the speech. I said, when it went inland, they're the one that messed it up. And when it got to New York, they really screwed it up. But we started it. So they're the ones that's wrong.
All right. We're
I
ready.
don't try to change mine.
No, thank goodness you don't. A lot of islanders, I think when they leave, they get a little self-conscious. But, you know, that's the way you live on is that heritage. Some of the Ocracoke down there, people laugh, say when they're all talking at once, it's like being in a duck pound, the way they're going. But it is, they understand each other. And had a man one time tell me, they said they were all talking. There was 2 or 3 O'Neills in there. And I didn't even know it. I found out later they were talking about me. All right, gang. Thanks for coming out. Hope you enjoyed it.